So truck drivers, lease operators, owner operators, company drivers, anybody thinking of coming into this industry, in today's video I'm going to be talking about working for a mega carrier or a larger carrier versus working for a small carrier. In today's comparison, I'm going to be taking a company with up to 25 trucks, and then we'll talk about 100 plus size trucks. So when I'm referring to a bigger carrier, I'm talking about any carrier that has over 100 trucks in their fleet. And if I'm referring to a smaller carrier, then we're talking about a trucking company with less than 25 units in their fleet. So it could be anywhere between 1 to 10 to 15 to 20, up to 25 or over 100. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the advantages, the disadvantages, my personal opinion on whether or not you should work for a bigger carrier or smaller carrier. I'll give you the pros, I'll give you the cons, and then you guys can decide. These are things that people don't talk about, but you need to be made aware about all these things so you can properly decide what company you want to work for. If you're currently working for a big carrier and want to transition into a smaller carrier, you'll know the pros and the cons for it. If you're working for a smaller carrier and thinking of going to work for a bigger carrier, you will know the pros and cons after this video. So let's get to it. Let's take advantage of the information, the notes that I have. So I did make notes on this, so I will be looking down to read, but let's get to it. So let's talk about the advantages of working for a large carrier. So point number one, a large carrier can offer you a variety of positions. So what do I mean by this? So a company that has 100, 150, 250 trucks, they usually have multiple divisions. So they have, a van reefer division, they have a flatbed division, they have a regional, they have long haul, they have short haul. So if you're working for a larger carrier, you are able to switch from division to division. So for example, if you're working for the flatbed division and then you're getting all tired out, or it's too much for you, or it's taking a toll on your body, or you don't want to work in a flatbed division in the winter time when it's snowing and minus 20 outside, then you might want to transfer to a van reefer division. So working for a larger carrier can give you the flexibility of working from division to division. So a larger carrier might be a little bit more flexible with working times and your vacation. So this is very big for owner operators or for lease operators. When you're working for a big carrier, right, you want your home time, you want your flexible times, and you want your vacation time. So if you want to take a Monday or a Friday off, then you should be able to do it with a larger carrier. With a smaller carrier, they might depend on you a lot more because you're one of 20 or one of 25, and your vacation times and your flexible times might not be so flexible. The one thing that I love about larger carriers is that they have the infrastructure in place for drop-in hooks. So if you're a long haul driver, if you do dedicated freight and you do drop-in hooks, then you're not wasting your hours on pickups and deliveries. So for example, our highway drivers, when they're in the GTA, they don't do a pickup or a delivery here in the GTA. The loaded trailers are usually in the yard. So larger carriers are able to put that infrastructure in place. We have a lot of customers in the US that we have trailers at their facility. So when drivers come to the US, they drop off their empty trailer, they hook onto a loaded trailer, and then they come back into the GTA. I love that about bigger carriers. The smaller carriers might not be able to do that, especially at both ends. The larger carriers, a big advantage to them is they have more things streamlined. They have the infrastructure in place, they have a safety and compliance department, they have recruiting department, they have your dispatch, they have after hours dispatch. So if you need to get a hold of somebody at 8, 9, or 10 p.m., then you have somebody dedicated to helping you with the problem. With a smaller carrier, you might not have that, you might feel uncomfortable to call after hours. They might not have that infrastructure in place. They might not have a safety department. So if you're calling, you're most likely calling an owner if something is wrong, and you might not feel bad for calling late at night. But when you have working for a mega carrier, there are people in place to help you. The stability in the contract. So I feel like mega carriers, they don't have the fluctuations as much as smaller carriers do. So the bigger carriers, they have their contracts, they have stability, they have work, and it's repetitive. Whereas in a small carrier, you might not have these contracts and you might get affected by the market a lot. Lastly, the benefits and the facility. So benefits, healthcare benefits are usually a lot better with bigger carriers than they are with small carriers. The health packages are usually, you have a lot more coverage with a mega carrier than you would with a small carrier. All right, so now let's talk about the advantages of working for a smaller carrier, okay? A smaller carrier, what I do like about working for smaller carriers is you get more recognition and you're not just a number. So when you are working for a smaller fleet, they know you by name, they know your driving habits, they know everything about you. You are most likely in contact with the owner. So any carrier who has, less than 25 trucks, you're usually dealing with a dispatcher, and if you have any problems, usually contact the owner of the company. Smaller companies tend to have a more friendlier atmosphere. So if you walk into the dispatch room, everybody knows you by name. If you walk into, if you talk to the owner, you're talking directly with the owner of the company. So you have a more friendlier environment. The smaller carrier are more dependent on you. So for example, if you're one of 20 drivers or if you are one of 15 drivers, they are really dependent on you as a driver. Okay, so for example, if you're a fleet of, if it's a fleet of 10 and you're one of 10, then you're basically 10% of their company. So they're dependent on you. And sometimes drivers, owner operators, lease operators, they like to feel like they're being dependent on. It's a good feeling. And especially when you do good things, you're rewarded in a much bigger way. And you're able to shine a lot more when you're one of 10 or when you're one of 20. When you're in a fleet of 300-400 drivers, what do the big carriers, the mega carriers, what do? They have their annual, Driver of the Year award or, Safest Driver award, but that usually gets to 1 or 2 drivers out of 100 or 200 or 300. So really the likelihood of you getting recognition in a mega carrier is not so much. So another advantage is about your relationship with your dispatcher. So your relationship with your dispatcher at a much smaller firm, or if a smaller carrier, you have a personal relationship with that dispatcher. They know you by name, you know them by name. They usually know about you, about your family, about your personal problems. About theirs. So it's a much more smaller knitted environment, and you guys know a lot about one another. Smaller carriers, an advantage is you have less overhead expenses and they usually pay better. So why do they pay better? So infrastructure costs money. So a mega carrier, for them to have their safety and compliance team, for them to have a 6 or 7 acre lot in a certain location, infrastructure costs a lot of money. Whereas a smaller carrier doesn't have infrastructure in place and they're able to pay a lot more per mile. So for example, if a mega carrier is paying $1.55 or $1.60 per mile, for owner operators, a much smaller carrier would be able to pay probably about $1.65, $1.67. So they're usually able to pay a lot, not a lot more, but they're usually able to pay a little bit more money because the mega carrier spends that extra money on the infrastructure that they put in place for you. Another thing about smaller carriers, I think, and I believe that there's a lot less micromanaging in small companies. So smaller companies will tend to not micromanage you as much as the bigger fleets. The bigger fleets have you tracked, they have e-log systems in place. They know everything and anything about you. They have front-facing dash cams, they have driver-facing cameras. So they're a lot more, they manage their drivers a lot more than the smaller carriers. But now let's get into the disadvantage of working for a small carrier. So a small carrier, you are one of 10 and it's harder to take time off. So if you're one of 10 drivers and you're trying to take off 2 weeks or 3 weeks off, it is a lot harder and they will give you more crap about it for taking the time off. They won't have a second division to move to. So if you are in regional, if you are in long haul trucking, they usually don't have another position to put you into. So for example, let's say you have, your wife gave birth and you want to be home a lot more frequent. You cannot do these long haul trips anymore. They cannot put you into a different division. They're just, one of 10 trucks and this is what they do. A huge disadvantage of these smaller fleets is that they don't have the buying power of these mega carriers. So mega carriers or bigger carriers or larger carriers, they usually have discounts when they're buying fuel. They usually have discounts for tires. They usually have discounts for parts. Now, if you're an owner operator or a lease operator, this is extremely important for you. I mean, are you paying the pump price? The pump price right now is about $4.50 or $4.35 per gallon. Well, in our company, the owner operators get 25 cents off the pump price. So our owner operators are only paying $4.10 per gallon. Well, smaller fleets are usually paying the pump price. Maybe they get 5 cents off or 10 cents off, but they're not getting the 25 cents off that we get, for example, or the mega carriers. I'm sure they get 40 cents off, 50 cents off the pump price. So that's a huge disadvantage also when it comes to parts and when it comes to tires. Bigger fleets tend to have much more of discounts. Another disadvantage is smaller carriers will tend to feel the downfall in economy a lot more. So when there's a shift in the economy, when there's a cap in, there's not so much outbound loads or inbound loads, smaller carrier will feel it a lot more. So here's one that I hate that happens when I see drivers and I recruit drivers, and when they come from smaller fleets, they usually have a story of them not getting paid. So when you are leaving a smaller fleet, I don't know why, I hear this all the time about drivers are not getting paid their last settlement, or was withheld this much money, or was withheld that much money. Oh, my ex-boss owes me X amount of money. I hear that a lot more with smaller companies than with mega carriers. It is unlikely for a mega carrier or for a larger carrier to withhold your pay or not pay you fully for what you're supposed to get paid. Another thing that I hate about smaller companies is that for some reason, a lot of them tend to go, at some point or another, they tend to go belly up. So they end up closing their doors. Now, we've seen this hundreds of times, throughout the last 10 years. There's only maybe 2 handfuls of mega carriers or carriers with large fleets that have closed their doors, but there are thousands of stories of smaller fleets, that mom and pop shop, 5-10 trucks, that there's a shift in the economy and they just get swiped under. So they go under and they don't pay off their settlements. Even in mega carriers, if the company goes under, they still end up settling the bills of the driver pays. That's they are known to, even when they go belly under, they're still paying off their driver settlements. Whereas the smaller carriers, they don't, if they go belly under, they don't end up paying their drivers, their lease operators or owner operators. And there's so many stories of drivers losing their trucks because somebody went belly up and then they end up not getting paid, and they don't have enough money to pay for their truck, and then their truck gets repossessed. All right, guys, so my 2 cents, what do I see? So I've been in the trucking industry for about 15 years now. Okay, I was in dispatch, I've been in recruiting, I've been in brokerage and sales. I've seen in the last 5 years when I'm recruiting drivers, I've seen so many things go wrong with drivers. So my 2 cents on, if I was a brand new driver and I was looking to get into the industry, I would most likely go with a mega carrier because they have a lot more to offer me as a new driver, and their infrastructure is in place to train me properly. I would not get trained from a small carrier with less than 10, 20 trucks. I would not get into that as a new driver. I would only go into a larger fleet that has at least 100 trucks because I want to be trained properly. You hear a lot of horror stories about drivers up north, especially in Ontario, in Alberta and BC, drivers that are not well prepared, and they get into accidents. They get into situations that they really shouldn't be in, and that's because their training was done wrong. Okay, you really need to get into a mega carrier. Now, let's say if I was in 2-3 years of experience, what would I do? I really like what the bigger carriers have to offer. You might get away with a better rate per mile with smaller companies. Just one thing you need to be aware is, what I would definitely do is, if you're going into a smaller carrier, read their reviews. There's so many Google reviews, and people leave reviews now, which is great, because if you hear the reviews and multiple reviews about a company that, oh, I left this company and they didn't pay me, and you can see that on the people's Google reviews. So if you're thinking of going into a company, make sure you see their Google reviews, because if they don't pay their settlements, then run. Do not sign up with that carrier. Make sure you read the Google reviews before you go into any company. Yes, there's always going to be the 1 or 2 bad, but you want the majority to be good experiences with this carrier. You don't want the majority to be bad and negative experiences. Look at their Google reviews, ask around, ask questions. You want to go into this carrier? Ask questions. See if you can find drivers that are working inside that fleet. See if you can find ex-drivers that have worked for their fleet, and ask, what do you think of that carrier? Did they pay you? Did they pay you the settlement that they owed you? Very, very important. So what would I do if I was a driver with 2-3 years of experience? I think I would stick to the larger carriers. The reputation that smaller carriers have built for themselves is not that great. If a smaller carrier does have a good reputation for themselves, read it on Google and then be secure and feel more comfortable about going into that smaller carrier. So hope you learned something from this video. Whether you are going to work for a mega carrier or a smaller carrier, make sure you do your research on the company. I'm Ronen, and I'll catch you in the next one.